Hi everybody, it's Peter Schiff. It's Monday, June 15th, 2009. Well, the Dow was weak all day today. I think we closed close to the lows, down just under 200 points, about 190 points. I think the market was reacting in part to some comments over the weekend coming out of the G8 with regard to the need to ultimately withdraw some of the fiscal and monetary stimulus. And obviously that's a huge understatement. But to the extent that the markets have been propped up by the stimulus, the threat of removing the stimulus and therefore knocking out that support weighed on the markets. But also today, we had a strong rally in the dollar. The dollar index is now back above 81.5. With the rally in the dollar, we had weakness in commodities and gold. We also saw a rally in the bond market. And I think a lot of this dollar strength, bond strength, was arranged based on more talk, more hype coming out of elected officials. Basically, over the weekend, I think it was the finance minister of Russia who came out and said he has complete faith in the dollar. Once again, talking up the dollar the way the Japanese minister talked it up a few days earlier. Now, I mean, the fact that you even have people talking up the dollar should be a clue about how weak it is. I mean, nobody's talking up the euro. Nobody's talking up the yen, right? You don't see the Russian finance minister having to say he has faith in the euro because he doesn't have to. He has to say he has faith in the dollar because he doesn't have it. I mean, if he had faith, he could be quiet. I mean, it's funny too that all the other central banks deliberately talk down their currency. We had comments over the weekend out of New Zealand where they're worried about the strength of their currency. You see the same type of comments coming from Europeans, from Australians, from Canadians. Why does everybody else want their currency to be weak? Why are we the only ones that want to talk up our currency and everybody else wants to talk theirs down? Again, what they're trying to do is maintain this ridiculous global relationship where the world produces and lends us the money to buy their stuff. And this giant vendor financing scheme can continue. But as I said many times on this blog, it's not doing the world any favors to lend us money, to buy their stuff. They'd be better off not lending us money and keeping their stuff, or at least making sure that the people who buy their stuff don't need to borrow the money. You know, we're having the first ever meeting, I think it starts tomorrow, with the BRIC countries, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and they're having their first summit to discuss the economy, and I'm sure the biggest item of discussion is going to be the dollar in the U.S. market and the need to constantly maintain the strength of the dollar so that they can all pretend to have a viable market. They pretend that we're good customers and we pretend to pay them, and the whole thing is a giant farce. Meanwhile, they accumulate our IOUs and we get all the stuff, and they don't want to realize that this makes no sense whatsoever. You know, and when you think about Russia's statement that they have confidence in the dollar, how can that possibly be when they know without their efforts to prop the dollar up, it would collapse? I mean, the people that know for sure that the dollar is phony and that it would collapse are the people who are propping it up. It's like if you go, look at a used car lot and the guy that's selling the cars, he's the one that rolled back the odometer. He's the one that got under the hood and just put some temporary fixes on there so that potentially the car could survive the test ride without the engine falling out. When someone comes onto the showroom and he's saying how great this car is, how much confidence he has in the car, I mean, he knows for sure that the car doesn't work because he's the guy that rigged it all up for the test run. So the guys in China, the guys in Russia, Japan, they know the dollar would collapse without their support. So how can they have confidence in the very currency that they're working so hard to prop up? If the dollar was really sound, it wouldn't have to be propped up. If the dollar was sound, it wouldn't have to be talked up. It's the fact that it isn't sound and that it is being propped up that it's unsound. In fact, this type of verbal intervention, which is really what I would call it, is all we've got. I remember back in the 80s or so, or the 90s, when the world wanted to support the dollar, they did it by intervening in the currency markets. They went in and bought dollars. Well, that might not be very effective anymore because that's done on a daily basis now. The entire world is constantly intervening. The BRIC countries, everybody is is buying dollars in order to keep the dollar from collapsing. So they're already doing all that intervention. So now they're trying to add some more verbal intervention, but it's a lost cause. And unfortunately, what the world doesn't seem to want to come to terms with is the more money they lend us, the longer they prop up our currency, the more money they're going to lose, and the more screwed up our economy becomes in the process. You know, the more rope they give us, the easier it is for us to hang ourselves. Also, today, I was watching Barack Obama. I didn't get to see the whole speech, but again, he's talking about the need to bring healthcare costs in line. And I agree with him. We need to rein in healthcare spending, but we need the free market to rein it in, not the government. We need to understand that the reason that healthcare spending is out of control is precisely because of government involvement. And President Obama wants to try to make sure that more people have health insurance, when part of the problem is an over-reliance on health insurance in the first place. You know, people have insurance for their houses, right? You have insurance in case your house burns down. You don't have insurance in case the toilet overflows, right? You don't have insurance for a light bulb that goes out. You know, routine maintenance, you pay for that yourself. But the problem is in medical care, anytime something goes wrong, people get a splinter, they're going to go to the doctor. You know, I mean, routine medical care is now paid for by a third party through insurance. And why is that? It's because of the tax code. It's because if you work for an employer and he pays you wages, you get taxed. But if he gives you health insurance, there's no tax. So there's a government subsidy that builds in a non-market preference for health insurance over money. Now, the minute everybody got health insurance, they all want the best health insurance. They want the lowest deductibles. They want the lowest copays. And so now you remove all the market disciplines and all the market forces that would have kept healthcare costs in check. And so the solution is not more government involvement, it's less government. It's for the government to understand its role in driving healthcare costs up and what it needs to do to allow the market to bring costs down and prices down. You see, free market dynamics are a recipe for lower costs, lower prices, and higher quality. Government interference and government intervention and subsidies is a recipe for the opposite. The government comes in and lowers quality and increases costs and increases prices. We want to do the opposite. You know, I was talking again, a reporter today asked me again about companies being too big to fail. And again, I tried to give her an example of no companies being too big to fail, but how dangerous that precedent is, because once we pretend, or once we dub a company too big to fail, they get even bigger and bigger, because now they operate under that presumption, and now creditors let down their guard. Creditors are willing to lend money to these companies because they think it's safe, because the government will bail them out. The best example of why too big to fail is wrong is Freddie and Fannie. They were perceived to be too big to fail because of this implicit government guarantee. People were willing to lend them endless amounts of money without any regard to risk or ability to pay because of the perception that the government was there. So the last thing we want is for that perception to persist. Because if we're going to make companies too big to fail, then we've got to regulate them. We've got to regulate them intensely, which is what I don't want. I want market regulation. Because if we're going to say we don't want companies that are going to be too big to fail, then we have to make sure companies don't get too big to fail. But we're going to stop companies from growing that should grow. I mean, if we had some kind of too big to fail doctrine years ago, where would we have stopped the growth of Microsoft? How big would we have allowed Microsoft to get before it ran into the ceiling of you're too big to fail? We don't want governments determining when a growth should stop and when companies, could grow and when they can't grow. We want the market to do that. We want lenders to understand what the risks are and to make prudent decisions based on market risks, not the government to come in and try to guarantee against loss and create the distortions, and as a result of this, have to get more regulation to try to now rein in the companies that they made too big to fail. Anyway, we'll see what happens with this, this talking up the markets over the next week. Obviously, they must sense some problems. Even Treasury officials were talking up the markets today by saying they won't monetize government debt, when that's precisely what they're doing. Anyway, that's it for today.